Hi, Megan.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today for the Fashion Means Business event. I have invited you to join us because you conducted research on what we call sustainability innovation for your final major project, studying BSc in Fashion Management. And I have heard that it was such an excellent dissertation you produced that you were awarded an award. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So obviously, as part of the course, you also do the CMI Chartered Management Institute diploma, and my dissertation was submitted at the end, and it won the Student Award of Excellence.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, and I recently heard it's gone through to the next stage of the competition, and I've been named the London Regional Student of the Year.
Congratulations.
Thank you, which is very exciting. So, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the research you did that led to you being awarded that award?
Yeah, so it's centered around the investigation into the luxury fashion industry and how they can achieve greater environmental sustainability. So I focused more on the environmental factor, specifically textile production, new materials, and this was through the application of biomimicry, which is, basically speaking, it's a branch of science that studies nature's models and processes to solve human problems. So it's to derive design principles from biology and look into nature as inspiration. And so my dissertation focused on the development of textile technologies through biomimicry to transform the future of luxury fashion. And then the study also looked at the consumer perspective more so than industry. It was mainly consumer, and just understanding their motivational factors that affect consumers' intentions to purchase sustainable luxury fashion, and ultimately sustainable luxury fashion that's been created with biomimicry. So it's a bit of a mouthful.
Can you give us an example of how would that look for a luxury fashion company?
At the moment, biomimicry is largely used in industries such as engineering and architectural design. But in terms of fashion, I'd say a most common example is actually Velcro, but more the structural principles of Velcro. That was inspired by plants that naturally stick together. But I'm looking towards more of the process. So, for example, mushroom leather. So it doesn't go through that tanning process you get when you use animal hides, and the negative impact of the chemicals and toxic chemicals that uses. There's also spider silk, and that's where it's kind of biologists and designers come together. And with spider silk, they've looked at the DNA and the proteins that the spiders use to create the silk and replicated and mimics that, create more sustainable silk.
That's really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about what you discovered?
So in terms of the consumer's perspective, my research really showed how influential personal and inherent values are in the consumer decision-making process, how important consumers' own beliefs are about the environment and how they take these into consideration when purchasing their own fashion. But also consumers, from my qualitative interviews and personal experience, biomimicry, they reported very positively to that. And just the facts. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. And its application, just saying that it would more so enhance a brand's image. We have this idea, I believe, these expensive materials with leather and other exotic skins, and even other materials like silk.
Yeah.
That's luxurious, but consumers thought the idea of biomimicry would be luxurious in itself, if it's done correctly and if there's enough research and what's the word?
So basically, consumers, they're really interested in sustainability innovations in materials, and actually see it as an advantage if luxury companies are engaging in sustainability innovations on a material level.
It evokes an emotional sense to buying products as well. So I think from that perspective, someone buying biomimicry and understanding the process, why it's been used, and how it's been made, I think that would make it luxurious in itself as well.
Yeah. We're looking at alternatives to, for instance, leather, and you explained that leather is actually quite unsustainable because of the processing of leather. Silk is it's not, we don't have it as an abundant natural resource, and there are some sustainability challenges in terms of how it's produced as well that has shed light on the need for alternatives.
Yeah.
I think that's what you sort of have been highlighting here, that there's a need for coming up with something new that can replace existing materials in a more sustainable way. So I think it's a really interesting topic. What was sort of your main discoveries otherwise? So you mentioned that consumers are actually quite interested and are willing to purchase alternative, more sustainable material. What else did you discover?
So in terms of the variables I researched and specifically focused on, I used two theories and created a dual theoretical framework. So I looked at universalism values. So this is a lot to do with an individual's kind of innate values towards protecting the environment. It has factors such as, equality, broad-minded, tolerance, appreciation of the environment, that kind of thing. And then as well, I measured moral norms, so just the individual's perception of right and wrong. I also did subjective norms, so the perceived social pressure to perform or not to perform behaviour. And from that research and my findings, the increased level of moral norms and universalism values an individual has, the more likely they are to engage in sustainable biomimetic luxury fashion, as well as perceived knowledge. Knowledge as well, someone who's more aware of environmental issues and the negative impacts of textile production on the fashion industry, the more likely they are to purchase biomimicry, and more likely that they'd look positive towards its implementation in the luxury fashion industry as well.
And it's interesting because one of our other students that are part of our Fashion Means Business event, she actually also looked at moral norms and how that plays a role in sustainable consumer behavior. So those consumers who are interested in sustainability often see it also as their responsibility to be so, or it is if they're not sustainable in their behavior, it misaligns with their moral norms, which I find quite interesting, that we've sort of identified that in a couple of projects, research projects, that moral norms, and looking into that whole area of, well, I guess it's both philosophy and psychology, applying that in order to better understand which consumer it is that's interested in sustainability, but also probably how we can notch interest to a higher extent.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's interesting that you also that's also one of your findings. So you've identified that there's certain characteristics for the consumers who would be interested in alternative materials and that are more sustainable. What would be, sort of based on the research you did and all your insights and discoveries, what were your recommendations for the luxury fashion industry?
So there's a few factors, I think. A first one, which would be transparency, which of course is known within the industry. It's been consumers demand more transparency, but from research, there was still little trust in brands. Transparency was more of a basic expectation and responsibility, and not just saying they have initiative in place, but to actually show what it is and how it is, and to create greater trust, which I think is still, because it's still quite recent, I believe, that the industry is doing this. Where consumers aspire brands that reflect their own beliefs and aspirations, I think it would create a positive brand image for these brands just to be more honest. I also think business decisions and needs to be decided with accessibility its core right from the beginning throughout the supply chain, from textile production but also to the end of managing their waste. The respondents said although they can strive to do their best to engage in sustainable consumption, luxury brands and the fashion industry in general ultimately have the power to influence this behaviour. And like you said, targeting those consumers more psychologically in how they identify what their beliefs are. And then I think a big one is education and communication. I think, again, luxury brands have a huge power to influence healthier consumer habits. And going back to almost like a reset, fast fashion is not healthy and sustainable. I think we need to create and reteach healthier consumer habits, going back to slow fashion. I think consumers want to know and understand brands' sustainable practices. And like the research, environmental considerations are definitely significant with consumers who show higher universalism values and higher moral beliefs. So, understanding those attitudes of the consumer and to help create more targeted marketing communications. I think also from personal experience, and where I've also worked with on the shop floor, the reality is a lot of consumers still don't know the impact, and they're still unaware. And although there's a lot of they say they would like to engage in sustainable consumption, but there's the difference from actual behaviour. So I think together all these factors would create better and more positive brand association.
So we're looking at honest communication, investment in sustainability innovation, because consumers are generally quite interested in that. They're certainly not opposed to it. And talking to consumers in a transparent way to those consumers who are already very interested in sustainability. So they don't necessarily trust the brands the way they talk about it. So it needs to be a more honest conversation that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, and biomimicry, obviously, would be a large investment, and I've seen Stella McCartney, I've seen, has done some things using that kind of methodology, but I think it would create a large return on investment and a more positive outcome. So yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think there needs to be honest communication, because I even saw just a post today that said as little as 20% of consumers trust what brands say, because there are consumers that are smarter now and do their own research, but there's definitely the opportunity as well to educate other consumers that may not be as aware, but still that would be willing to create more sustainable choices if they knew how to, or the reality of the impacts on current practices.
Being aware that there are some characteristics that we've identified of the consumers who are interested in sustainability, and perhaps also acknowledge that there will be consumers who won't necessarily be interested in it by themselves. Yeah. So editing for those consumers would be a way of creating more sustainable consumption.
Definitely.
Oh, Megan, thank you so much. That was really interesting. And I also know that you are you looking to publish your research? Is that correct?
Yes, and our patient supervisor are working on it at the moment. We've sent out a survey and just collecting those responses.
Collecting data, yeah. So our audience will have an opportunity to read much more about your research at one point when that article is out. I want to thank you so much for joining me today and telling us about your research. It's really interesting, and I think a lot of us learned a new word there, biomimicry.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. It was a challenge, but definitely paid off.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.